Hi guys, we are so glad you've joined us for this week's episode of the Tree.Church Bible Study podcast. I am Kelsey Bohl, the Associate Director of Young Adult Ministry here at the Tree.Church. Basically what that means is I get to lead our new Young Adult Ministry, TYA, which stands for Tree Young Adults. Our guests today and your conversationalists are two of, honestly, my most favorite guys on staff who I respect a ton. Mick Harper, the Director of Missions and Property, and Pastor Chris Reed, Director of Biblical Education. And you're also an elder here.
Yeah.
Your full title.
Yeah, we've joked about this in the past. Like Michael and a guy that used to be on staff here, they started this thing where they give all my titles every time they say my name. Mm-hmm. And then I'm like, you need to stop doing that. So it's elder, pastor, director.
Yeah. All the things.
They throw in bishop and pope every once in a while, and I don't like that. But
I feel like it fits.
Yeah, no.
I like it.
But yeah. Well, let's talk about this for a second. This is your first time on the podcast.
It is.
And you're hosting.
I know. Who let me do this?
I don't know who's in charge of this podcast.
You did.
Yeah, I did. Right. And I'm excited about it. So how are you feeling with everything? And it's your first time, and welcome, and really glad that you're doing it. So
thanks. I'm excited to be here. I admittedly have some nerves, but I'm pumped to have a conversation with you guys about God's word. I think it's going to be great.
Cool. Yeah. One thing about Kelsey, every time I have a conversation with you, I walk away and I'm like, she might be one of the best conversationalists I've ever had a conversation with. So like, you just ask great questions. You always engaging, know how to lead the conversation well. So I was like, she's a natural fit. What do we do here but have a conversation? So you need to be on the podcast. So
that's kind of you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it. Okay, let's hear from you guys. So today's passage, 1 Corinthians 9, has a lot packed into it. One of the things we're going to talk about is missionaries. And both of you have had multiple missions experiences. And I would love to hear about some of those experiences and maybe even specifically talk about your motivation and calling to those. Mick, let's start with you.
All right. So for me, it kind of started young. So I started as a sophomore in high school was my first trip. I took a trip to Mexico and then kind of fell in love with it then. It was definitely a weird trip. We stayed in Texas and we traveled across the border. A lot of the stuff felt really sketchy, especially as a sophomore when you're really nervous about it anyhow. But I loved it. I loved it's kind of like that initial planting of the seed of service for me, being able to get away from my environment. Kind of through high school, it became a little self-serving for me. Like everything was kind of like what I'm getting out of it, how much popularity I can obtain. And for once in my life, I was able to break away from all of that, get in an environment that was not focused on me even a little bit, and just be able to focus on other people. And I fell in love with it. From that point on, I pretty much have taken a trip at least every year somewhere, with the exception of 1 or 2 years in college and then 2020. Kind of been a little bit of everywhere, but kind of that same idea. Every trip for me is like a chance for me to get away from the norm, away from that self-service idea, and just be able to completely focus in on somebody else in an act of service. So I really love them.
Cool. What about you, Chris?
So mine started when I was actually a senior in high school. I took my first trip, and I've been to Honduras and Haiti and Bolivia with some eyeglass, a doctor. What's that called? Optometrist. There we go. Yeah. My cousin happened to be an optometrist, and he started an organization called Cross-Eyed Missions. And so he would travel to these different countries, and he would take, we would take totes and totes and totes of used eyeglasses. So like we'd collect through the year and then get them all gathered up, get prescriptions written on them. They had some really cool tech that you could just really travel with and read people's prescriptions. And so we do that, and we give people glasses in these places. And I absolutely fell in love with it. So like at first there's always that feeling of like, I'm going to do this because it's a benefit to that culture. But what I quickly realized and what I've come to love about doing mission trips, and I've been a couple different places other than those, and I've done a couple different types of trips. The last one being with Mick to the DR last year with the youth. But what I've really come to love about cross-cultural missions is that it gets us out of our kind of, and when I say bubble, I mean like we live in a community that we're comfortable with, that we know the context, we know the culture that we're in, and stepping outside of that and seeing how the rest of the world lives, seeing how they function as believers, how like what's important for them and their churches, and really taking the opportunity to learn from other cultures about how to love Jesus in a way that's not American, Western, and you know what I mean? And so like, I really love and think that's a very valuable experience, to be able to experience other people's cultures, to learn from other people's cultures, and to also, because there is a level of like, you provide a service that they need in that moment, whether it be for the missionaries or for the people themselves, like through the eyeglass thing. But you get an opportunity to be a part of what God is doing in those cultures, and you get to learn from them in the same moment. I love that.
For sure.
So,
That's cool. A little bit for me is I have not gone overseas or into another country for any short-term or really long-term missions.
I feel like Mick's going to change that for you.
We tried just a few months ago, and it didn't happen.
We did. There are a few things going on.
Yeah.
Mostly the transition of taking this job. But yeah, that might change. But what's interesting is when I was in high school, I did a couple short-term mission trips with my church's youth group to Kentucky, which was really cool to even just see a different community within our country. I thought that was great. And then I was a part of a parachurch organization, specifically doing youth ministry for a long time before this job. And we kind of viewed ourselves as local missionaries, like here in the States. And so what I think is really cool is that in a lot of ways, and hopefully we'll dive into this more in the conversation, but in a lot of ways, I think we're all called to share the gospel, right? That's pretty clear.
Yeah.
And I think what's beautiful about the body of Christ is that we're all called to share it specific to us, specific to how God created us in our giftings and callings. And so I love that even just sitting at this table, we all had different experiences and different callings, different maybe motivations or things that excite us about missions. Before we dive in to today's chapter, I also want to ask, because this will come up later in our conversation, what is something in your guys' life you have trained a lot for?
I wouldn't say a lot for anything specifically, but I have done. So we do CrossFit. That's pretty much a constant, like something that has been a part of my life now for a minute. Kind of got started when it's been maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I went with my wife Molly. We went and she invited me to the gym with her. And I always considered myself to be a decently strong person just because I was a bigger guy. I've not ever considered myself small or skinny. But as I was there with her, I realized how little weight I could lift when it was put on a barbell. And so I spent some time training for that, especially over the next year, because the amount of weight that she could lift, the differential wasn't there based off of our physique. I was like, man, I should be able to do a lot more. So I did train a lot for that, and actually specifically weightlifting through 2020 when I had a little extra time at home. So I've spent a good bit of time with that, but I still wouldn't say that I'm a professional or even great at that yet. But I think currently I'm actually working on Spanish, spending a lot of time trying to self-train myself Spanish, self-teach. And actually this past Sunday night, we had somebody that is fluent in Spanish. She came from a Spanish-speaking country. And I asked her, I was like, I'm doing Duolingo. Is there any chance that I'm ever going to learn Spanish from that? And she's like, you can, but it will take a lot of time. So that's where I'm at right now. I'm putting in the time. I don't know that I'll ever be proficient at it, but I'm working on it.
I feel like we're good friends, and I didn't know that about you. That's cool.
That I'm doing Spanish?
Learning Spanish, yeah.
I'm trying.
or that you were good friends.
No, I didn't know that.
All of this is new information.
No. I didn't know you were trying to learn Spanish.
I am currently.
That's awesome.
We'll see how it goes.
Cool. I'll tell you what. We both travel a lot. I learned more. I took classes in high school for Spanish, and I learned more Spanish in a week in a Spanish-speaking country,
for sure,
than I did ever in a Spanish-speaking class. But
yeah, And I think the older you get, the harder it is to learn a
yeah.
language. And she brought that up. She's like, with your age, and I tried to be offended, but I wasn't. I was like, I get that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm doing the same thing with Greek. So like I took Greek classes, like biblical Greek classes, but I'm doing Duolingo for modern Greek and vocabulary, like just keep up with vocabulary and the sentence structures and stuff like that. So I've been working at that for a couple years now, and it's slow and steady.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Chris, have you trained for anything else?
A few things in my life. I've done a couple marathons, and I absolutely love running. So like I really enjoy. I enjoy doing that. So train for that. I'm training for a couple things right now. So training for I do CrossFit with Mick, and so there's kind of the big event that happens every year called Murph. Yep. And it's a workout, and it takes a little bit of to train for. So training for that, I've never done it. You're supposed to do it with a weighted vest, like a tactical vest, and I've never done that before. So that's what I'm kind of training for this year. So to do that, and then I would like to do a 50K by the end of the year, which is about 32 miles.
By the end of 2023?
Yeah. Actually, October 7th is when I've got it on the calendar for. So
I think if I was going to do 50K, I would have to start now, and it wouldn't be training. It would just be the running.
Just doing the running?
And I probably could get it by 2024 if I started now.
Yeah. No. 2024.
Yeah. You would be able to handle it. You could do it in 24 hours, I bet. Like, because I've done it. My brother, Brandon Lightnecker, who's on staff here, is one of the pastors. He and I just about every year do a 24-hour challenge. And this past year, we did 31 miles, so in 24 hours. So running every hour. We did 2 miles through the first 7 hours.
Is this the one with chores or without chores?
This is the one without chores.
Oh,
so
okay.
Brandon saw this video, this guy that does it, and his thing is he would do a project in between each mile that he did.
What?
Yeah. So like you run at the start of every hour. So like 5 a.m. is mile 1. So you run a mile, it takes about 10 minutes. You're back, you got 50 minutes to work on a project, to do some chores around the house. At 6 o'clock, you're back out on the road, do mile 2. At 7 o'clock, mile 3. So
that is wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can do it for 24 hours.
So do you nap in some of those 50-minute windows? Okay.
100%.
Okay.
We did the chore one 2 years ago, and that was not effective. So like it was really hard to get stuff done. Mm-hmm. This year we did it in the dead of winter. It was like the coldest day of last winter. I'm sorry. It was last January. We did it. It was like 0 degrees outside. And so it was different because it was undressing, getting things dry before you went back out for the next hour. And that took a good chunk of time getting warmed back up because it was really cold out. But
guys, I think you kind of sound nuts. Anyone who knows me
a little bit
anyone who knows me well knows I don't love physical exercise. Just fun fact about me. I don't enjoy it. It does not, I know the benefits of it, right? Like I see it improve my mental health. I see it help me sleep better. So I do it, I partake, but I'm just so impressed and a little bit jealous, like wish that I had that motivation or drive.
Train for anything? Language or like... This sounds so lame, but I don't think so. Like, I know I asked this question, but I don't know if I have. So that's all right.
Yeah, I think it's fine.
Something to put on your billboard.
I know. What should I train for?
Yeah, I don't have any suggestions.
Okay. Mick, you got anything for me?
I've got nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Okay, so before we dive into today's passage of 1 Corinthians 9, to get us all on the same page and kind of recap what we've been talking about for a little while is I want to share the theme that we've seen Paul addressing throughout 1 Corinthians. And it's this idea that the way in which we relate to others is so important. And above all, we're called to unity with other people in and through the expression of love. And today, Paul's going to address the rejection of himself and how this is impacting his relationship with his specific audience, the people of Corinth. So we're going to dive into 1 Corinthians 9, if that's all right with you guys. And we're going to start in verse 1, and we'll break it down in some chunks of passage and discuss. So in verse 1, it says, "Am I not as free as anyone else? Am I not an apostle? Haven't I seen Jesus our Lord with my own eyes? Isn't it because of my work that you belong to the Lord? Even if others think I am not an apostle, I certainly am to you. You yourselves are proof that I am the Lord's apostle. This is my answer to those who question my authority. Don't we have the right to live in your homes and share your meals? Don't we have the right to bring a believing wife with us as the other apostles and the Lord's brothers do, and as Peter does? Or is it only Barnabas and I who have to work to support ourselves? So Paul's really starting off by reminding his audience of his position, his role, that he did encounter Jesus. He did have a life-changing experience with Jesus, and he has been sent off to share the gospel and begin planning what we would call churches, right? A group of believers who follow Jesus. Mm-hmm. And so as we read those first several verses, what would you guys say is the working definition of an apostle? What is their role? What are their responsibilities?
Sure. So as I see it in Scripture, as I see it in the New Testament, and there's different thoughts of what exactly an apostle was. Like when I was studying it, there's a couple different theories of like what was meant by the word. A lot of it stems from an Old Testament word. Some people think that it comes from the Old Testament. Some people think it just comes from Greek culture. But the main idea is really almost like an emissary, like a messenger, someone who is sent out. And so the two main ways that Paul uses it are the idea of someone being sent out from a church. So like it could be anybody. So they are sent by the church to spread the message of Jesus. Or it could be one who bears authority. So like they come on behalf of someone else bearing that authority. So when we start to see that really even as far back as into the Gospels, what Jesus is doing with his disciples is he sends them out and they're commissioned to do a job, and he gives them his authority to cast out demons, to heal the sick, to preach the good news. And so it's this idea, this is where they become apostles. They were disciples before. Disciples would be students. Apostles were sent out. And so like they are given the authority of Jesus, and they are going out and they're spreading the message and doing the things that Jesus does. And so this idea carries over, and the disciples, mainly the 12 disciples, get kind of the name, the 12 apostles. Now, there were more than 12 apostles. Paul becomes an apostle. There's thought that there are up to 500 apostles, because really the prerequisite was, and the prerequisite that Paul works off of was this idea of they saw the risen Lord. So they experienced, like with their eyes, they were witnesses to Jesus' resurrection. And so these are the people that are commissioned to go out and bear witness to the fact that Jesus came back to life. And so as the church develops, and particularly Paul is very early on in the church, Paul is some of the earliest writings we have, and he starts to use this in both ways. Like he can use it as simply a messenger from a church, but he also uses it as one who bears authority, the authority of God in sharing the message. And Paul sees himself, I mean, he even says it right here. He says, even if others don't think that I'm an apostle, I certainly am to you. I'm the one who brought the message of Christ. I'm the one who established your church. I'm the one who made this a thing for you. Like your faith is because I've been sent by God to you. And so Paul sees himself as bearing both the message of Christ, but he's also sent by Christ because he saw Christ. And there's a lot of really cool insights into Paul's thought process with apostleship. And I don't want to talk too much here, but he really does. He sees himself as part of the apostolic tradition because he saw the risen Lord, but then he also sees himself as the least of those apostles. Mm-hmm. He doesn't count it. You know what I mean? Like he doesn't say, like, I'm on equal or par with them. Like Jesus showed up to me and I was persecuting the church, and he saw it fit enough, so I'm least of them. You know what I mean? And so
sure, we see his humility modeled in a lot of his writings. Follow-up question to that, which I genuinely am just curious. Would you say an apostle has to be someone who lived in the time of Jesus and witnessed that, or could there be apostles today? How do you differentiate that?
That's a great question. from what I read, I would land on apostles really stem from the idea of witnessing the risen Jesus.
Sure.
And so there are people that claim that Jesus appears to them today. And I'm not one to discount that appearance. You know what I mean? There's a lot of stories in the Muslim communities of Jesus appearing to people in dreams and appearing people in the room with people, and it changed their life and they become believers. And it's just this amazing experience for them. Will we consider them apostles? I don't know. You know what I mean? I know it became there's questions of how it was used in the New Testament church, of
Sure.
whether or not it was a position outside of the fact that these people had they were leaders in the church because they had experienced the risen Lord. And so you see it multiple times. Like I said, there was a lot of apostles at this time. There were 11 distinct apostles that were Jesus's disciples who had a high level of authority. Then you get the leaders of the church like James, the brother of Jesus, who was an apostle. And then like people like Paul and Barnabas. Barnabas would have been an apostle. And then at the end of Romans, you get Junia and you get a couple other names of people that we would not ever heard of before if Paul wouldn't have wrote their names in there. So
Great.
Does that make sense?
It does.
Your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think, as I've read scripture for a lot of years, I think the term disciple and apostle, like they can kind of, if I'm not reading to really study it, they can kind of just have the same meaning. So I love that you define them both. Mick, what do you feel like the church's responsibilities to such people are and should be?
Yeah. Well, that kind of changes things, I guess, based off of Chris's definition of saying that an apostle was somebody that was sent by Jesus to tell of the witness of Jesus. I think by simple definition, which is where I'm at, is maybe more simplistic. What I looked up as far as an apostle by definition is someone who is sent to share a message. So if you take maybe a more simplistic or a more modern day approach to the word disciple, then that changes the church's responsibility a good bit, because there would be probably very few and far between as far as people that would call themselves apostles.
Apostle, yeah.
So like by working definition, I think that the church's responsibilities definitely would change based off of where you land on that definition. So if we're going with the more simplistic definition, that kind of changes where I'm at with it. So simplistic would be to go and share. I think the church has a lot of responsibility in that, which we at the Tree, like that's kind of Chris and Brandon kind of head up that whole department of discipleship, teaching people how to evangelize, teaching people how to go and share, and then what that looks like after the fact, as far as trying to disciple them, get them into some Bible classes, get them to learn more about who Jesus is, what he's done for you, and even helping you in that next process. But that's, I think the church's responsibility in the go and share portion is a lot of it is the training and in the teaching that we're giving on Sunday, is helping prepare. And then from even a larger standpoint, if you're talking about going and sharing, maybe you are talking whether that's local missions or global missions, that training again looks different. Mm-hmm. And I think as a church, having the privilege of being able to support those people or even being able to send people, I know that's, as the missions director, that's like a huge thing that I would love to see, is us be a sending church to missionaries that are going out, whether that be a local mission or a global mission, being able to send out some of our congregation to say, this is what you're learning, now go share it somewhere else. Obviously that's all of our responsibilities through evangelism, but even on a more maybe specific, as far as like that becomes their job, that becomes what they do. Mm-hmm. Being able to be a sending church to a missionary would be an incredible experience, and then to be able to come alongside them. So part of our responsibility, which we'll get into maybe a little bit later in this, as we already read about, as Paul is kind of going through not necessarily a complaint list, but he's making them aware of it. There is a responsibility when you're into full-time ministry in general. It becomes somebody else's responsibility to take care of you. We're going to cover it in the next verses, but there's not there's no income based off of, you're not producing a product that is going to then be able to be turned and sold to make an income. So it's going to be somebody's responsibility, whether that's somebody locally, they've got to be taken care of in some way. Mm-hmm. So it becomes the entire church's responsibility to take care of them. And then just in general, the care, being able to come alongside those people and care for them. So I know we're going to cover that again later, but like in short, it becomes the church's responsibility to help train people to be able to go out. And then it becomes the church's responsibility as a group of believers, as a group of Christians, to come alongside and support them both financially and with their care. So,
yeah, I think you said so many good things there, and I'm trying to remember all of them off the top of my head here. But like the idea of producing a culture of calling, like I think is so important in taking on that responsibility. When we realize as a people that absolutely every single one of us, maybe we don't bear the title apostle, but every single one of us are responsible for bearing witness to who Jesus is. Right. And we are filled with the Holy Spirit. So we're empowered by God with the authority of God to present that mission. You know what I mean? Now, we may not be an authority of a position at the church, but every single believer bears that. And I think you're right. Like on both ways of doing that, for those that do everyday life, and the church has traditionally called them lay people. I don't like that term because it differentiates between the leaders and the people that are sitting in the seats. That's not the heart of Paul. You know what I mean? Like, not to differentiate that, but for everybody to realize, hey, we're called to this. We have responsibility in this, in bearing witness to this. And we are going to do it in our everyday lives, and some of us are going to do it in being called to go and be missionaries, and some people are going to be doing it and being called to plant campuses locally. You know what I mean? And so like the thought of, and this is really my heart and where I get to participate in that, is like creating a leadership pipeline, like providing opportunities to train people and understanding their calling, but also providing opportunities to train leaders and what it looks like to step into that place. Like, and so it's awesome to think that everybody gets to participate, and there are those that we do call to go beyond that and to give their full time to being a missionary in their culture, whether it be down the road or across the world. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, I'm going to keep talking here for a second.
No, you're good. I do have a follow-up question. In terms of our conversation, would you guys say that a missionary is very similar to an apostle, but that an apostle was just used for the terms of people who lived in Jesus' time and saw him?
So honestly, the term apostle, the Greek term, really carries the idea of being sent. So yeah, like you get this idea of one being sent by either a church, like they're going from their community, their place of comfort, their place of living, and then from there they are bearing witness of Jesus. And so yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is equative in definition, if not in title. You know what I'm saying? So
sure. And I feel like missionary is maybe a term that's just more commonly used today.
100%.
And so going forward, maybe we'll use those a little bit interchangeably in terms of talking about how does this apply to us today.
And Paul did mission work differently than even the other apostles. Like, so Peter stayed in Galilee and in Jerusalem, like where Paul traveled all over the Mediterranean, planting churches and doing his work that he was called to do. And he has different purposes for each mission trip that he takes. And so, yeah, I think it's a much broader idea than saying it's just this or it's just this, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I think in this first chunk of passage we read, we really see Paul is reestablishing his relationship with the group of people he's writing to, right? He's reminding them that their faith is because of him going and spreading and sharing the gospel. And it seems to me that Paul kind of comes off frustrated that the people of Corinth aren't really willing to care for missionaries and leadership, meaning Paul, in maybe an appropriate or right way. And that really leads me to wonder, like, why is trust between leaders and the people that they lead so important?
I think in general, I mean, trust trust is going to have to go both ways in that, whether you're a leader or one being led. I mean, it takes so long to build up that trust, but only a second to be broken, or an incident to break that trust. But as a leader, having people under you, if you want to say it that way, or people that are following your lead, having them be able to trust you is a great feeling. It lets you lead confidently, for one, but just in general, just having people that trust what you're going to say, you're going to get more accomplished. You're going to spend less time in explanation of why. There's going to be less why behind it. And people, like I said, it takes a while to build that trust. But then once it's built, and you have that team of people that you're leading that trust you, you can trust them. Like same thing in reverse. If you're leading somebody, hopefully you're passing on, as a good leader, you're passing on some of that responsibility. And if you have people under you that you can trust, you're able to accomplish so much more.
100%.
And just in general, that overall relationship is going to be so much better. There's nothing worse than being led by somebody that you feel like has done you wrong, or even vice versa, leading people that you're like, man, I continuously have to check on what they're doing, or I continually have to ask them questions. Just that difficulty, that tension between the two, it doesn't allow much to be accomplished.
Yeah, I think you hit on a key word there. You said relationship, and that is, leadership is relationship, and so every relationship needs trust. You can't have a healthy relationship without trust, and so it's vital, because there are going to be moments when you disagree on things. There's going to be moments when you meet hardship and things don't go the way that you plan and the way that you want. And trust is that thing that fills in the gaps when our expectations aren't met. You know what I mean? And so like when we do have those moments where we do have those moments where somebody has questions about, and we've seen this happen before. People ask questions of us all the time. Why did you make that decision? Why are we doing this? Like we recently moved our tables from our commons to our
Right.
to the back of the branch, and simple things like that are opportunities where people have questions, and that's okay. Questions are good. We're wondering why decisions get made, and when we fill that space with trust, we go, oh, okay, I can go have a conversation and find out maybe the reason why. When we fill that conversation, that space with distrust, that's when we start to go and complain to everybody else, and we start to just get disgruntled about it. And that's when disunity starts to happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So trust, I think, covers that, every aspect of it. When things are going well, like, it's because we trust each other. And when things are going bad, we have a foundation to branch off of because of trust. And I think in Paul's situation, he's like, why? I've given everything to you, and I've given you more. And why are you now, you want to just follow the popular leader now, and you just want to go and do your own thing? Like the relationship has been broken, and they've broken it for whatever reason. You know what I mean? So, like for all these reasons that they're like, nah, I think I'm going to start following that leader. You know what I mean? And so Paul's frustrated because Paul's hurt. Like you know what I mean? And I think there's a level of that I think gets forgotten sometimes with leadership and with people that follow leaders. Is leaders are human beings, and they have emotions and feelings, and they get hurt just as easily as those who sit in the pews. You know what I mean? And it goes both ways sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think those are really good points. And I hope that we'll circle back after we read this next section of scripture to maybe some more of our responsibilities as a body of believers and what that is to missionaries. So
sure,
let's pick up in verse 7. What soldier has to pay his own expenses? What farmer plants a vineyard, excuse me, guys, and doesn't have the right to eat some of its fruit? What shepherd cares for a flock of sheep and isn't allowed to drink some of the milk? Am I expressing merely a human opinion, or does the law say the same thing? For the law of Moses says, you must not muzzle an ox to keep it from eating as it treads out the grain. Was God thinking only about oxen when he said this? Wasn't he actually speaking to us? Yes, it was written for us so that the one who plows and the one who threshes the grain might both expect a share of the harvest. Since we have planted spiritual seed among you, aren't we entitled to a harvest of physical food and drink? If you support others who preach to you, shouldn't we have an even greater right to be supported? But we have never used this right. We would rather put up with anything than be an obstacle to the good news about Christ. Don't you realize that those who work in the temple get their meals from the offerings brought to the temple, and those who serve at the altar get a share of the sacrificial offerings? In the same way, the Lord ordered that those who preach the good news should be supported by those who benefit from it. Yet I have never used any of these rights. And I am not writing this to suggest that I want to start now. In fact, I would rather die than lose my right to boast about preaching without charge. Yet preaching the good news is not something I can boast about. I am compelled by God to do it. How terrible for me if I didn't preach the good news. If I were doing this on my own initiative, I would deserve payment. But I have no choice, for God has given me this sacred trust. What then is my pay? It is the opportunity to preach the good news without charging anyone. That's why I never demand my rights when I preach the good news. We see Paul use several analogies in this scripture, right? And I really feel like see him take a posture of humility instead of privilege. And so specifically around verses 15, 16, and 17, he really starts to address his motivation behind why he's doing what he's doing, right? Like he feels so compelled by God to do it. That's what it says in 16. How do we, as people who are called to share the gospel, as we've talked about, how do we keep our motivations in check?
So Paul, he's addressing, he's tail ending the question that you asked last time, like what is our rights to, like, or what is our responsibility to missionaries, to those who do the work full time. And he's going on and he said, all the other apostles, they take this right and they're given this right and they should. And he explains why they should be. They have the right to do this because we see it modeled in the Old Testament. We see it play out. We see the priests are given benefit from, because they have no portion otherwise, like they were, when Israel was given the land, the Levites were not given a portion of the land. They were given the right to serve and minister before God in the temple. And they were to benefit from the other people, the other tribes and the other villages surrounding them, the villages with which they lived in. And so this was a way in which they were supported. It's the way they lived. It's the way they eat, and the way that they cared for their families and whatnot. And Paul's saying, like, the apostles have every right to this just as much as the priests do. Maybe not through the official taxing system of or tithing system of the temple, but through the community of believers. The community of believers were, you see it in Acts 2, they were gathering their funds together. They were sharing, they were putting it for the good of everybody involved in the community, but also for the advancement of the gospel and for the care of the people at other churches. I mean, it's why Paul went to Corinth, because he was collecting a offering for the church in Jerusalem. And so Paul's like, every person who calls themselves a full-time and has been given that authority by a church or by an missionary organization should be compensated for what they do. But that doesn't mean they have to be. Like, does that make sense? So sure. Paul is saying, like, for me, I would rather not take that. And Paul might have a bunch of different reasons. As I was thinking about it in my own life, I know there's oftentimes a tension and a responsibility with realizing that other people, the people that walk in our doors every single day, they support my lifestyle, my way of living. And I don't find any guilt in that. And the tension is not that is the thing that happens. There's always just the tension of there's potential for other motives to come in at that point. You know what I mean? So depending on the church that you work at, you can make a lot of money at a church. You know what I mean? And so there are missionary organizations that have you raise ample amount of funds you know what I mean? So like there's a lot of motivations that could creep in to this. And Paul is like, no, I first and foremost and always, and particularly in this instance where they're rejecting him, he's like, no, he's like, I don't even take the rights that I'm deserved, because I want you to know that my motivation is to preach the gospel and to see you grow into the fullness. Like, he's removing every possible argument that they could have against him. You know what I mean? He's like, and how much is it that how terrible would it be if I didn't preach the good news? You know what I mean? So like, he's just saying like, my motivation is 100% clean in this. Like, I want nothing but your benefit from this. So why are you being jerks to me, essentially?
Yeah. I love this passage. Not because I'm in full-time ministry and I'm like, yeah, that's Paul. Way to go, Paul.
Yeah.
But
say it louder for the people in the back.
No. I love it because he's basically, he expresses his frustration, but he's like, you know what? Nothing, no matter what the sacrifice, is going to keep me from doing the calling that God has for me. That you guys could choose to do nothing and I'm still going to go on.
Yeah.
But I think that a lot of people, and I think that this is probably part of Paul's frustration too, is a lot of people don't realize the blessing that they're missing out on, or the benefit that they can have to the kingdom of God by being able to be a support to people that need to go, people that are called to go. Mm-hmm. So I think he's expressing it in a way where like, hey, you guys know that I'm called. There's no doubt in that. You guys have trusted my leadership. We're in this together. You guys are also called to support me. Hopefully you understand that, as he's expressing it kind of frustratedly, maybe. And then at the end, he says, but regardless of your stance on this, regardless of what you do, I know my calling, which to me just like reaffirms his trust in God. Like, God's going to take care of me no matter what. He doesn't necessarily need you guys. This is your responsibility, but God also doesn't need you guys in this. I know my calling. I'm sure of that. And no matter what, this is the most important thing for me, to spread the good news, which is kind of contrary to like working a secular job, which I moved out of that not too long ago. But I realized like a lot of that is self-gain. Like you're self-promoting your ideas to get to that next level, to make more money, which doesn't negate your calling, like we had already talked about, of everybody needing to be a witness and where they're at, share the gospel. But as you're called into a full-time ministry, those motivations change. Like it is, what can I do to spread the gospel even more? And I think Pastor Matthew does a great job every time I've ever heard any conversation. As it goes along with money, it's not in that selfish gain. But look at how much more we'll be able to grow the kingdom with this. So it's always with that kingdom mindset. Like, what can we do to share the gospel even further? And so I love the passage, not only from the standpoint of like Paul being frustrated, but he's also expressing like, I have a calling. I know what that is. God's going to take care of me. But you guys have the responsibility as well, and you're going to find joy and you're going to find, satisfaction in doing what God wants you to do. Mm-hmm.
I think what's unique even in the way that we're addressing this conversation is, if from our culture, there really is there's more of a drive to push towards a bivocational pastor, because people have a harder time. And I'm not speaking this I'm talking about our culture in general, not our church.
It's a real tension for some people.
Yeah. Like the fact that they are giving money to pay your salary is difficult for people at times. And so, but what's unique is that like they're frustrated with Paul because he didn't take the rights. And so like the flip side of it is also true, where Paul comes back and he says, no, the motive is the same. Like, my apostleship is rooted in my calling by Christ, and this is why I do it, because Christ called me to do it, and because it's what I'm called to do. That is what makes me an apostle, not whether I look like it because I'm getting paid to do this. Or, I mean, he talks about in the other letters that he writes to the Philippians, he says these people they preach the gospel for selfish gain, and he's like, at least the gospel is being preached. Like, he has a good attitude about it. But like for him, he's like, I do it. Everything that I do, I want to be known. It's because I've been so impacted by who Jesus is that this is why I do everything that I do. And I think you hit that so pointedly in what you said, that I think that is the motivation that I try to, as someone who is supported by other people's giving and their generosity, that's constantly in my mind, and the motivation that I want to keep before me, because I don't ever want to do it because of the pay and the benefits. You know what I mean? I want to do it because God forbid if I don't, because it would burn inside of me. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So like, so yeah. And the one thing, sorry, I'm talking a lot here again. The one thing that really stuck out to me, and the other thing that I wanted to talk about in this passage, was the whole idea of being compelled. And I think that's unique because it really even speaks back to when Paul was called. Like, what was the thing that and Jesus told Ananias to tell him? Like, go and open his eyes and let him know how much he's to suffer for, how much he's going to suffer for my name. Like, so Paul sees, and even from the very beginning, he recognizes, okay, I was the one. He says, I'm untimely born, like later in some other place. I can't remember exactly where. I'm an apostle that was untimely born. I was a persecutor of the church. Jesus in his grace saved me and called me to this position. And he says, I'm going to act above the board in it because, like, I know no other way to be. Like, and this is what God has called me to. And what I think about it is, like, the burden for the church is part of that suffering. Like, the fact that he has to deal with this situation, with their rejection, and yet he still feels so burdened towards them and loves them, like, I think is a beautiful thing. Like, I think through Paul's suffering, we see, and through his brokenness, we see so much of the heart of Christ for the churches and for people. And I think it's a unique thing. Like, he could have been just like all the other apostles, but bearing that suffering through the way that he has a burden for the church is amazing to me. Yeah.
I'm a firm believer that we're all called into something, whether that is full-time ministry here. So I think you can take that same, kind of idea that Paul's throwing out there. And whenever our reliance comes on anything other than God, like whenever we're trusting on anything to provide for us other than God, I think that that's a really dangerous position to get in. And a lot of times I think people will even miss their calling or maybe be just timid about going into their calling or pursuing what God has for them, because in the back of their mind, they're like, well, how am I going to provide for myself, or what is the provision going to be? And they kind of forget that God's the provision for everything, no matter what the calling is, whether that's vocational or in ministry. Just remembering that God has a calling on your life and that he's going to provide for you no matter what situation you're in, I think is super important.
Man, that's so good.
Yeah, it is. I really feel like there's a faith element that we all have to lean into, right?
100%.
Whether we're in vocational ministry like the three of us or we're not, I think what our call is to steward the resources and the gifts that God has put in front of us in our life, the things that we're good at, the physical and the non-physical resources. We're called to steward them well in the purpose of advancing the kingdom of God, in the purpose of sharing the gospel, right?
Yeah.
Which honestly I feel like leads, Paul was smart when he wrote this, but leads so well into the next section. Is there anything else you guys would like to say on that last section before we go forward? Okay,
no.
Cool.
I feel like I talked too much in that section. So.
You guys both have great things to say. Okay, so we're going to pick up in verse 19. Even though I am a free man with no master, I have become a slave to all people to bring many to Christ. When I was with the Jews, I lived like a Jew to bring the Jews to Christ. When I was with those who followed the Jewish law, I too lived under that law. Even though I am not subject to the law, I did this so I could bring to Christ those who are under the law. When I am with the Gentiles who do not follow the Jewish law, I too live apart from that law, so I can bring them to Christ. But I do not ignore the law of God. I obey the law of Christ. When I am with those who are weak, I share their weakness, for I want to bring the weak to Christ. Yes, I try to find common ground with everyone, doing everything I can to save some. I do everything to spread the good news and share in its blessings. I feel like at the beginning of this section, Paul starts by declaring his freedom from the expectations of people, but also by declaring his commitment to people. And honestly, this paragraph might be one of my most favorites in all of Scripture, with some of my favorite lines being, I've made myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. That's what it says in the NIV version. I've become all things to all people so that by all possible means I might save some. And I do all of this for the sake of the gospel. I think what's really tricky about that language, and what I want to dive into with you guys, is how do we become all things to all people, but without being people pleasers? What is the difference? And then how does that play out in our lives? What does that actually look like in our day-to-day world? What do you say to that, Mick?
This is a tough one. I think that Chris intentionally invites me on podcast where there could be a debatable topic. No, I'm just kidding. But I know that I've heard this preached multiple ways, and so I've been as I heard the question, I knew this was coming. I was like, man, what does that mean to me? And as I was thinking specifically about missions and how it's affected in the ministry, kind of my quickest example to that is like the different cultures that we're involved in. Pastor Matthew and I, along with our wives, both we took a trip to Africa recently, and the culture there is definitely different, like 100% different than our culture. And even like some of the dress and some of the things that are some of the ways that the ladies dress in particular is much different than our culture permits, and then things that are accepted there not so much. But as we were thinking about that, or as I was thinking about that, I was thinking about like in different cultures, a lot of times you adapt to that culture out of respect. Like it's not necessarily like something that is solidified, like this is the way that things have to be. But as you're a part of that culture, the way that they view, coming under that like kind of conforming to their culture allows you to be able to minister in a whole nother way than you would typically be able to minister to them. If they see something is inappropriate and you're performing that action, even though in our culture, you're like, particularly dresses, ladies over there, as we went out especially into the remote villages, it was all dresses. And so our culture, not as widely a thing that we look at a lady that's wearing pants and would say something about, but in their culture, that has significance. And so going into them and trying to minister to them when you're not maybe even informed of their culture, like you create a stumbling block, you create something that they're saying, you know what, I can't get past that to even hear your message. And I think we do the same thing in our culture. Like there's things that can create barriers in us being able to minister. So removing those obstacles so that we can minister is super important. And even if we want to flip it again and go the other way, there's things that people enjoy that if we can speak through those things. We were talking about music actually before the podcast and what different people enjoy. And I know that that's been over the past who knows how many years has been a highly debated topic. But as you dive into those different cultures of people and you're like, man, I can now minister to these people in this way, not necessarily changing the message, but maybe changing how we deliver the message to make it relevant to that group of people, I think is a great, kind of a great way to think about it. Like I'm not changing the message at all. I'm not changing the law of Christ. I'm not changing what the Bible says. I'm not gonna compromise on those things, but there's things that don't matter that if I can minister to those people, if I can create relevancy in their world, then I'll do that because the most important thing is the message, not maybe the messenger or even how it's delivered.
Yeah, I think that speaks so straight to the heart of Paul, even in what he says in like the very early chapters where he's like, some say I follow Apollos, some say I follow Cephas, some say I follow Paul. And like he's just like, what is the messenger? But God waters, God is the one who plants, God is the one who works. But yeah, to what you said, like contextualizing the message that we have is vitally important. Even how we function as human beings. I'm in a psychology class right now, which has been both great and challenging, and like just It's been an experience. I'll just say it that way. But something that the professor said is this idea that there are certain beliefs, there are certain levels of jumps that we can make in our beliefs before we, let me think of how I want to say it. There's only so far that we'll make a jump in a belief system. If we try to extend that out too far, and I'm going to give an example in a second, like we cannot make that leap in our minds. Mm-hmm. So say we grew up to understand that OSU football was the only good football team.
That is how we grew up.
Yeah, I mean it's exactly how we grew up in Central Ohio. Right? I have some conversation points, but no. So if that's the way that we were raised, for somebody to come from Michigan and say Michigan is the best football team, that is too much of a logical leap for us to believe. If we have different opportunities where we go, hey, look at how amazing this part is about Michigan football. Like man, and I'm gonna botch that wing offense.
I love how you're going with this.
Like that spread offense, isn't that an efficient way to run an offense? And somebody from Ohio State can go, oh yeah, I see. That's an efficient offense. Like I get, okay, so they've made one leap. That's a leap we can make. To just go straight to, I now believe that Michigan football is, you know what I'm saying? Like It's too far. And so we do the same thing with our faith. The things of our faith can be contrary to what our culture understands and what they've been raised in and what they believe in. To say that we have an invisible God when everything is about the tangible, observable, material world that we live in, that can be too much of a leap at times. And so we have to find those places further back where we go, hey, this might be a place where we can interact and we can bridge that gap. And so like there are oftentimes those things that we do, but even like you said, even culturally, like finding those places where we can find common ground. I mean, Paul rails against like the festivals, and he rails against all these different Jewish, specifically Jewish practices. But what we see him do in Acts is he goes and he finishes off a vow that he made with some other Jewish believers. So he goes to the temple, he makes the sacrifices that he needs to make, and he finishes off the vow as a believer, as a follower of Christ. After he tells people, you don't have to adhere to, you know what I mean? What is he doing? He's building a bridge so that like the Jewish followers aren't put too far off, you know what I mean? Create those barriers that you said.
Yeah.
So
kind of like even going back to your leadership question, helping develop trust in the people that you're leading. Sometimes it's little things, it's little jumps that you can do that create that trust to where when it comes time to minister to them in particular, you already have that trust established and you're like, okay, yeah, I have 100% full confidence in this. And then when somebody tells you something, you're less likely to just shut them off and shut them down. Which, I've been in those relationships too, where I've had people in my life that I'm like, as leaders, in the past, I've had leaders that have led so poorly that when they try to give advice, you immediately shut it down. You're like, these are all the reasons why this isn't true. And then, so even if it's good information that they're giving you, you're not receiving it well.
Right. And I think even in the places where I think most people, where belief does kind of come into it, and where even like the way we live, where we would say that differs from the way that we would say is a good value. So like, I think about people that work with, Mick, you just talked about an organization that goes and ministers to prostitutes on the streets. It's in the streets of Columbus, right?
Correct.
So like, if they go and they're just like, you're sinners, you're going to hell, like good luck. You know what I mean? Like, is that bridging the gap? You know what I mean? In creating the space for them to find Christ? No. So what do? They jump into a position of what most people would consider risky. You know what I mean?
Right, for sure.
Like they take a risk to go and present the gospel in such a way that demonstrates something they will understand: love, kindness, and mercy. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so what are they doing there? But what Paul's saying, they're becoming everything to everybody so that they might be saved, right? And
Right.
Have you guys heard of this phrase, you have to earn the right to be heard?
I have heard that.
yeah.
I feel like that's what kept coming to mind as you guys were sharing. And I think, you guys shared so much great stuff, but for me, what it kind of came back to is this idea of respect. Like, we have to listen first. We have to
100%.
understand the audience, and we have to love them for who they are and where they're at in their situation. And sometimes the situation seems so foreign to us, right? Like, sometimes it feels really hard to do because we've never been in that type of situation. But I think what's really cool is that we don't do that at the cost of the truth, but we do it at the cost of ourselves because we love and we want them to know the gospel. We want them to know Christ, right? Anything you guys would say to that?
Yeah, I think, again, I think it goes back to there's a level of risk and it makes us uncomfortable, which is why I think it's hard. When we're with people that we are like, and we're with people that we know and we're comfortable with, we feel comfortable and we're good with that. It's when we have to step into a relationship, say with a member of the LGBTQ community, like, and because God is going to call us into relationships with people from the LGBTQ community, so that might make you uncomfortable, and so like you have to be willing to step into that, and first and foremost realize this is a person, like, you know what I mean? Like, yes, there is this label that's been put around all of these different things, but this is a person that Christ died for, that Christ loves, that, you know what I mean? And so, like, yeah, we don't give up our standard, but we are willing to engage in relationship and be human beings with people that are not like us, and care about them in a way that human beings care about each other, or should care about each other. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. I think really what we're kind of getting at and pointing to is this takes intentionality and this takes sacrifice, right? This is hard to do. I really feel like this next section of scripture hits on that and kind of rounds out this passage together. So let's read starting in verse 24. Don't you realize that in a race, everyone runs, but only one person gets the prize? So run to win. All athletes are disciplined in their training. They do it to win a prize that will fade away, but we do it for an eternal prize. So I run with purpose in every step. I am not just shadow boxing. I discipline my body like an athlete, training it to do what it should. Otherwise, I fear that after preaching to others, I myself might be disqualified. So again, we see another analogy from Paul, athletes, which is really common in our culture today. But really, there's intentionality in what Paul is expressing as he talks about the way we are to live. And to live intentional feels like such a big concept. So if I were to ask you the question, how do we break that down? How do we live that out daily? Mick, what would you say to like the keys of living an intentional, self-disciplined life are?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of my nature anyhow, which is not everybody's, but I try to live my life disciplined. Like I have very specific routines that I like to follow, which I know is not the case for everybody. I have a certain time that I like to get up every day. I have a certain time that I like to get my coffee, shower, do my devos. Like it's very, I try to live intentionally, but as Paul's talking here, I think to, boy, this is tough, but to kind of break away from what maybe God has called him to do, or to try to live a life of his own. He knows that there's failure in that. He knows that he's not going to have success in his ministry. He knows that he's going to establish distrust among his people. So I think Paul, talking about running the race and running it well, he's talking about continuing to live a disciplined life, continuing to live how God has called him to continue to live out his purpose, how that's important to him. And if he fails that in any way, then he's really accomplished nothing. He's spent all of this time training. He's spent his time out ministering to other people. But if he fails himself, I think along with that, there's probably some fear that other people are going to look at him and realize, like, if Paul is not able to stand up to what he's been called to do, then how am I also going to be able to do it? Which I think brings in a whole nother level of responsibility to anybody that's called to lead, especially like pastors. I think that's where a lot of the weight comes in for them, as especially like you're looking at somebody like Matthew, like constantly bearing that weight of I'm ministering to people, and I myself have to also be conditioning, be training my mind, be training myself, staying sharp in the word, doing all of that so that not only he can run a race well, but ones that are racing with him, or the ones that he's training up as well, are able to have success in it. So I think that it creates a huge responsibility that I think we all carry in some way, but being disciplined in our life and setting up those checks. Like we talked about some training, and as you're training, you want to, I'm sure if Chris is training for a 50K, he's got some checkpoints in there. Like by the time we get to this, I need to be able to do this. By the time I get to here, otherwise, I know I did train. One I missed. We did a half marathon. I did a half marathon once, which I don't know. I'm not super proud of that because it didn't feel too difficult to me. That sounds braggadocious, but it just didn't feel like something I would have necessarily needed to train for. It was kind of an anticlimactic half marathon. It wasn't that fun, but as I was training for that, I did set up some checkpoints. Like by week 5, I need to be able to run 3 miles. By week 10, I need to be able to run 15 miles. Yeah. And I think as a Christian, being disciplined in our life, part of that is setting up checkpoints, setting up not necessarily some goals, but having checks in our life that we say, you know what, where am I at on this? How am I doing? Because all of us hopefully are training and are getting maybe not more spiritual, but we're growing in our Christian faith. And I think as we grow, our responsibility becomes even more, because we're not only just able to maybe our groups even get larger who we're ministering to. Sure. So I think having that discipline in our life and having those checks, having the things that we can go back to and say, where am I at with this? How am I doing? And making sure that we're continually growing. I feel like that's super important, and you have to go at it with intentionality. If you just go out there, for me, the half marathon was a bad example because I did feel like I could have went out and done that right away, but throw a 50K in there and there's no way. I'm looking at that and I'm like, there's no way I can get there without intentionality, without specifically setting up these things and saying, this is what I need to do. So I feel like discipline is super important, both in our personal lives, spiritual lives, and all aspects of our lives, really.
Yeah. Now I have undertrained for a marathon, and let me tell you, that's not a great experience. Like it's painful. I'm not one to quit things. Like I just don't like if I start something, I typically don't give up on it. I wanted to quit that marathon. I got like, I was hurting by mile 13, knowing that I had 13 more to go. And if you don't, like, Columbus Marathon is like up High Street, like 13 through about 17 is going up High Street. And it's just like a wind tunnel, and it's October in Ohio. So it's like 40 degrees outside, 45 at most. And like, I'm watching all the half marathoners walk off to their finish line and be done.
I could do that.
Like I could do that right now and be done. But I went by it, and then I'm going up High Street, and that wind, like I've slowed down at this point, and I've already sweated from having 13 miles in, 14 miles in. And I got so cold, like I couldn't stand it. Like the wind was blowing so hard, and I was just freezing. And there was a guy sitting with one of those like foil blankets on. I'm like, all I got to do is go sit on that curb, and that paramedic is going to hand me one of those foil blankets, and this will be all over. And like, that was my undertraining experience. So like there's just that moment of like you didn't prepare for this well, and it wasn't a good experience. And I think too, like continuing on that training point that you shared, like as you're training for something, it really becomes the center of what you're doing. So you start to bring in all those peripheral things. It starts to shape and take priority is not the right word for your life, but it takes a level of like, I'm now going to shape my time around this because it's going to take me so much time to get up and actually do the exercise. I'm going to start to shape my diet around it because I know it will be better if I weigh a little bit less. You know what I mean? Right. I weigh a little bit less. I know it'll be better if I if I sleep better, you know what I mean? And so like you really, when you're being intentional, you're shaping your life around this idea. And for Paul, like shaping your life around Christ, never for Paul is following Jesus a thing that you go, okay, I am this, I am this, I am this, I am this, and I'm a Christian. I'm a Christian. This permeates everything that I do. So like you talked about earlier, the work that you do, whether you're in full-time ministry or whether you're in business or teaching or whatever it is, you know what I mean? The way that you shape your time, the way that you shape your finances. Like, and I think that's what the biggest tension that people feel, I think, when they come to this and they're like, I want to be intentional, I want to grow in my faith. If you skip the part where you have to reorient really almost everything around like this idea of Jesus, like it becomes frustrating when you go, well, now I got to give up this much money, I got to give up this much time, I got to give up this much, and so like that creates frustration. But if you start with Jesus and build everything off of that and allow everything to kind of flow from that, like a little bit of that tension disappears. I mean, and so like in my mind, when I think about intentionality, that is what I think about. And it is like, I think it's prayer, worship, like scripture reading, fasting, tithing, Sabbath, like all of it is the way we train to grow in our faith, like to do what Paul is wanting to do here.
Yeah, I really like that. Like the part where you talked about focus. I was thinking of the couple of things that I've done, and how during that training my focus has been. I think some of the most annoying people, and this might be offensive, maybe not, is
I'll let you know after you say it.
I like them both, but it would be Ohio State fans and CrossFitters, because it's all they think about, it's all they talk about. Like, and I'm there. Like, I talk about it a good bit, especially with my friends or people I'm around, and even people that could care less about CrossFit. But it's something that I do on a regular basis. It's something I'm training for.
Yep.
So it's part of my focus. It's where I spend time doing it. I spend my money on it. You know, you have to have the shoes if you're gonna CrossFit, because who doesn't need flat-soled shoes that are not comfortable for anything other than CrossFit? So you go out and you buy all of the gear because it becomes part of your focus.
Exactly.
And as you become someone that is focused in on being a Christian and is training for that, you notice that your focus narrows even a little bit more. Those become your everyday thoughts. That becomes like, this is part of who I am now. This is what I do. So no matter where you're at, like you talked about, whether you're in business, whether you're in ministry, when your focus, when what you're training for, when what you're doing, and like the things, worship, devotions, when all of those things are aligning, you're doing that proper training that God has called us in to do. Like, you notice that becomes part of your conversation on even the most basic level things, like you're talking about whatever, and you notice that you're bringing God into that conversation, just like a CrossFitter does into their everyday conversation. It's because it's where their mind's at. It's where their focus is at.
Yeah, that's a perfect analogy. And you're right. You said you could say about football. You could say about, I mean, I'm sure there are other things that people are into. So, but
right.
Like collecting snails or stamps or something like that. I don't know.
I haven't met a snail collector, but I think I would like to.
I bet they're out there.
Yeah,
I got some questions for them. No, I think that what you guys are talking about with self-discipline and intentionality is so important and so good, and even sacrifice. But I think for me, when I was thinking about this, I really think it's important to remember the why. And Chris, you really started to hit on it, and maybe as we wrap up, I would love for both of you to speak to it a little bit more. But what is the perspective we should have? What is the prize? Why are we being intentional? Why does self-discipline matter? Why should training in our faith matter? What is it leading to? Because I think if we do those things, if we train for a marathon but we forget we're running a marathon, the training becomes rough, right? Like, we're like, why am I making myself do this? Like, we have to keep the end goal in mind. So what would you guys say Paul is talking about when he's talking about the prize, or why he is taking self-discipline so seriously? So
I think he says it perfectly in Philippians. So I'm gonna pull that up real quick here. And here we go. Let's see if I can maybe I can go to it. My Bible app is not working well here. Oh, there we go. So he says in the end of Philippians 3, he says, I'm gonna go further back, and I want to read this because this is both my favorite passage of Scripture. So I want to throw it out there for everybody to hear. But he says, and he's talking to a group of people who said that they're like the cream of the crop. They're like they should be listened to because they are they're following all of these festivals and they're doing all of these things. They've done all of these markers of being a Jewish person. And Paul comes along and he's addressing that. He says, look out for the dogs, look out for the evildoers, look out for those who mutilate the flesh. For we are the circumcision who worship by spirit and glory in Christ and put no confidence in the flesh, though I myself have reason for confidence in the flesh also. So he's saying, like, I've got, if anybody can call themselves Jewish, he said, I can call myself Jewish.
He has the credentials, right?
Yeah, I'm better. This is what he said. Where he's humble in some places, he's not in others. So he's like, if anyone else thinks he has reason for confidence in flesh, I have more. Circumcised on the 8th day, of the people of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, as to the law, a Pharisee, as to zeal, a persecutor of the church, as to the righteousness under the law, blameless. But whatever gain I had, I counted as loss for the sake of Christ Jesus. Indeed, I count everything as loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord. For his sake I have suffered the loss of all things and count them as rubbish, in order that I might gain Christ and be found in him, not having a righteousness of my own that comes from the law, but that which comes through faith in Christ, the righteousness from God that depends on faith, that I may know him and the power of his resurrection and may share in his sufferings, because becoming like him in his death, that by any means possible, I may attain the resurrection from the dead. That is Paul's purpose and goal. And that is, Paul, I would say, and I would say that because he's going to go on in Philippians to say, emulate me as I pursue this goal. Like, he's like, as I have striven, there's always,
as I strive.
Yeah.
That's a great word.
There's always one word that I make up in a podcast. So it's bound to happen.
Today it's striven.
Striven, yes. As I strive for these things, follow after me, pursue the same goal. And I think it's the same thing for us. Like, our goal, the thing that we shape our lives around is becoming like Christ and knowing Christ. Like, that is the prize. That is what we strive for. And that's why we do the discipline, the hard work, the going after, and being intentional about, pursuing that. So maybe.
Yeah, that one's that's hard to argue.
It is.
That was all well said. Some of the things though that I kind of caught on as we were talking through that was, like, during the training process, you'll have your highs and lows, and that's when it's important to focus back on those things.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as I'm doing some weightlifting training, you know, there's inevitably, there we go.
There you go.
I want to keep the word right. But as you're training, some point along the way, you're going to end up pulling a muscle somewhere, whether that's in your back, your hamstring, somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be a setback. You're going to have those setbacks throughout the way. But as you focus in on, like, what is the reason why I'm doing this, get you focused back in, a little more fine-tuned in your training. You maybe look at some weaknesses that you have. You set up some safeguards for those. You're like, okay, this is why I did this. Now I'm not going to do that again. It helps you be more disciplined even in your journey toward that eternal prize, like we're talking about. So as a Christian, you know, as we look at the areas, we are going to have our highs and lows. None of us are going to live perfect lives.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna see along the way, hopefully less as the longer we become Christians, or the longer we are Christians, we'll see less and less of those failures. But
Mm-hmm.
hopefully we're also setting up safeguards against those. It's like, you pull your back out and maybe you need more conditioning and core strength, or you need to wear this protective belt to help from that. You need to stretch more, you know, whatever the case may be. You're setting up those safeguards so that the next time you go and you attempt that particular goal, you don't fail again. So same thing in our Christian life, as we're going through, as we're on the journey, we're racing, we're training, we see these failures in our life, we can set up these safeguards and say, you know what, in the future, this is going to be an area that I'm going to avoid, or this is an area where I need somebody to help keep me accountable, because I never want to lose focus of what my eternal prize is. So
yeah, and you mentioned that earlier, the idea of, like, keeping it in front of you, but Shoot, this happens every podcast too, where I lose my train of thought of where I was going with it. But yeah, I think what you said is spot on. Like there's moments where we have to remember why we're doing what we're doing. It came back to me, and it was based on the idea of like, there are those moments where we have to specifically focus on things. Mm-hmm. I think when it, like in a practical example of that would be, like if you see like, okay, I'm struggling. There are moments where I recognize like, man, my life is just lacking like gratitude. Like, mm-hmm. So I've gone through life. I've taken things for granted. Like I'm really just grumbling, complaining about everything. I know that gratitude is an attitude Christ wants me to have. I can be intentional about that. So like I can practice, I can be put into play. Like I'm going to send one text where I'm thankful for somebody, or mm-hmm. I want to grow in encouragement. I'm going to send one text to somebody, an encouraging text every single day. I'm going to ask the Spirit to provide like where I can best get that encouragement. And I'm going to be purposed about that every single day. Well, what is that? That's training. Like you said, like mm-hmm. I got to support the core sometimes, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, and so like that, that's important for us to realize that it's not just doing the simple, like it's not just doing prayer, Bible study, worship. Those are important things, but also asking the Spirit, God, where are those things that I need to that would be helpful for me to grow so that I can continue to grow in my faith. And maybe it is joy, maybe it's generosity, maybe mm-hmm. it's whatever, and find tangible ways to practice that on a regular basis, if not every single day. So
love it, guys. Thanks. As we wrap up our conversation on 1 Corinthians 9, is there anything you guys didn't say or anything you want to circle back to before we close it out?
I think I'm good.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us for this week's episode of the Tree.Church Bible Study podcast. We hope that it blessed you in some way. And if it did, we would love it if you shared this with other people so that hopefully it will bless them too. And we also hope that you'll join us next week for the next episode. We love you guys and hope that your day is going so good.